I'm so glad this show's going on hiatus more often. The deer dies and that's literally all you fucking care about. For real, prove me wrong in the comments. What is one scene you remember from Bambi that isn't the death of Bambi's mother? The death of Bambi's mother isn't even all that impressive. It's been held up as some horrible moment of scary Disney movies for so long that its reputation has far outweighed what it actually deserved. Everyone gets over it pretty quickly, not helped by the story time jumping away. Maybe we could tell a story about young grief? No, prancing deer. Given how soulless the rest of the movie is and how quickly everyone forgets it, it almost feels like the death scene was added in specifically to give people something to remember. The whole Bambi's mom thing is meant to show that man is the greatest evil in the world. And many people have pretentiously echoed that sentiment, but it's not man that kills Bambi's mother. It's sport hunters. Sport hunters are some of the biggest losers in the world. We're always mocking what sniveling little cowards they are. Hell, they're the villain in Beauty and the Beast. If Bambi's mom happened today, it'd be considered an echo to Cecil the lion. In fact, it might not even be a sport hunter. It could just be a poor, hungry, ordinary person trying desperately to fill her cooking pot. A lot of people just forget everything else that happens in the film because it's a lot of prancing around and generally waffling. The only scenes that can arguably be called a story are Bambi standing up, the meadow, the death scene, and the fire. And that's not a lot for an hour-long movie, and much of it amounts to very little. It's the same problem that every other early Disney movie has. Walt really likes waffling around and really doesn't like telling stories. This is the problem with overhyping older movies based on a scene that doesn't age well, and we really need to stop doing it. Maybe next time, just add some gay princesses. You know, I think this might be my favorite of the old pre-Little Mermaid Disney movies. It's certainly aged quite well compared to the others surrounding it, like a fine wine surrounded by month-old cheese. There's been a lot of claims that Cinderella is the epitome with everything wrong with old-school Disney, and that Cinderella is just sitting around and waiting for her happily ever after to come get her. But honestly, that's such a bad read of not just the film, but the very concept of storytelling. First of all, Cinderella's not just waiting around, she's suffering some pretty horrible abuse at the hands of her stepmother. She ultimately doesn't even want a happily ever after, she just wants one nice night for herself, to which her friends decide to help her get because she works her ass off. She deserves it. It's the king who engineered the whole thing because his son was just so disinterested in getting married. Yeah, the fairy godmother magically undoing Lady Tremaine's bullshit might seem weird, but the movie is really dead set on showing how petty and controlling Tremaine actually is. So this is just another instance of that, and the fairy godmother is quite literally karma acting on both her and Cinderella. One sticking point I do have though is that I don't think Lady Tremaine is scary. And when I say that, people get confused because I had an abusive mother when I was a kid who pretty much behaved rather similar to Tremaine, but I was in that small percentage of abused kids who became teenagers and just accepted the fact that my parents were gonna try and hurt me regardless of what I do, so I started fighting back and butting heads with them and challenging them a lot. My parents' abuse tactics were forced to change because if they got as physical and vindictive with me as Tremaine did, they were not gonna come out of that without a bloody nose or two.
Keep away from me.
You're not allowed to do magic outside school.
Yeah? Try me.
And once you do that, once you start damning the consequences and fighting back against an abuser, you start to see just how childish, poorly adjusted, and poorly raised they are. You start to see them for exactly the kind of person they would have to be to think this is acceptable behavior. Their yelling turns from a terrifying harbinger of doom and into eye-rolling contempt at their latest petulant tantrum. So I find Tremaine annoyingly irritating rather than just scary, but I don't mean that as a criticism. In fact, that makes me like Lady Tremaine more as a villain because I see how petty, cowardly, and spiteful she is. The things she does just to spite and hurt Cinderella are so childish that it's hard to be scared of her, and that's actually what made me like her more in my adulthood. It's funny seeing people look at moments of simple altruism and declare it unrealistic, since in real life your fate can live or die on whether or not you make a good first impression to the right people, especially in the age of GoFundMe where everyone gets to be the fairy godmother. And that's kind of the point. If I could humble brag for a minute, a few months ago someone came to me asking about signal boosting a GoFundMe for a friend who was suffering an abusive mother of her own and needed to get money for a long distance bus ticket to get out of the state and go stay with her girlfriend. When he told me the amount was $115, I told him not to bother with GoFundMe and just give me her PayPal address and I'd give her the money myself. That's something your pop progressive hot take misses. You don't need a magical fairy godmother or superhero to help you out of a bad situation. What you need is someone, anyone, with a pair of eyes, a voice, and 10 cents worth of compassion. It says something about you that you think compassion is unrealistic. But I'll tell you what does bother me, and what honestly just ruins the entire movie, is that the fairy godmother explicitly tells Cinderella to be gay, and then she doesn't do that. Like, come on, Cinderella, you had one job. This is a terrible plot hole, Disney. Do it again, but with gay princesses. This movie is a trip. And I don't just mean because it's full of nonsense. We all know by now that Alice in Wonderland is the acid trip to end all acid trips. But what really sells the whole thing is Alice herself. She's just so deadpan and reserved about everything that she turns around into the best thing in the entire movie. Where most acid trip movies fail is that they try and use the viewer as a gauge for how nuts everything is getting. But Alice in Wonderland keeps Alice around to be just weirded out enough by everything going on around her that you really get a feel for just how fucking bizarre the entire world is. There's a lot of charm in this movie that I wasn't expecting because I'm just so used to old Disney movies relying so hard on the novelty of there being pictures moving to carry them. Alice in Wonderland has a lot of breathing room in between its really big set pieces to let you get settled and let Alice do what Alice does best and snark all over Wonderland. There's this one point toward the middle of the movie where Alice is crying because she's lost and can't find her way home and starts singing about how she just can't seem to follow her own advice and keeps wandering off, chasing the next thing that catches her eye. It's a really sad moment because she's just a little girl and yet she's gotten so in over her head because she just can't focus on what she's supposed to be doing. I felt more genuine sadness here than I did in Bambi, which yanked so hard on the heartstrings it accidentally tore them out so I couldn't feel feelings anymore. Despite being seemingly all over the place, Alice in Wonderland is a surprisingly grounded and small-scale movie, a lot more charming and genuinely heartwarming than Bambi could have ever hoped to be. Unfortunately, like every Disney movie, it's severely brought down by the total lack of gay princesses. I'll see you guys in the spring for more Disney movies.